Awesome, let's get started. My name is Christine Odera. I am an African and I come from a beautiful country in the east of Africa called Kenya, and I hope you all can come and join me. Today, we will be delving mostly into youth peace and security in Africa, and I am privileged to have at least 5 years experience in the field of youth peace and security as a specialist, and I have been able to help my country, Kenya, and some other countries in Africa formulate frameworks on youth peace and security. And in Kenya, I am now part of a team that is working on promoting sustainable peace through national youth policies. And we're just trying to amplify young people's voices in the whole youth peace and security agenda. And I hope I can hear more from you and what you are doing in your countries and other awesome projects that you are involved in. So today, for those who are joining me, again, thank you for joining in. And let's have some good discussion going forth. Awesome. So today I am going to be delving mostly into, clarifying the role of young people in relation to peace and security, because you would agree with me that for the past 15 years, there have been a lot of misunderstanding and stereotypes about young people, because most of the time, young people are, perceived to be perpetrators or victims of conflicts and violent extremism in the continent, without necessarily just understanding the whole involvement of young people. We're also going to tackle on how to navigate preventive violent extremism in a multicultural country. As you know, a lot of African countries have more than one ethnic group, different cultures just converging, and lack of proper intercommunication and intercultural skills can also lead to some of these misunderstandings and stereotypes. And finally, we're going to talk about is it then important for the Western world to be involved in the whole discussion? Because, again, we know our history, some of us were colonized by the West, and it has also caused a lot of drift when it just comes to addressing the whole peace and security issues in Africa. And so to begin this, I would like to bring your attention to the African Youth Charter, and I hope all of us are involved and knowledgeable on our rights and duties as African youth. And you can find all that information in here in the African Youth Charter. Please get a copy. You can find a link online. And this is where you can mostly get all the information about your rights and duties as a young African. The Charter defines a young person in Africa, a youth in Africa, to be of the age bracket between 15 and 35 years old, and so that's the age group that we're going to be mostly focusing on, because that's what we're advised with by the African Charter. So now, let me know when we continue. If you have some of the questions, please do not hesitate to write me a message, and I shall try to answer them as we go forth. Thank you so much for those who continue to join. We are talking about youth peace and security in Africa. And I would also really like to hear from you about issues that you're involved in the different countries in Africa. So to begin, I'd like to bring our attentions to some of the perceptions that are out there with regard to African youth peace and security. And some of the perceptions are that young people are victims and perpetrators of violence. It's young people who are always holding the guns, the machetes, throwing stones, causing havoc in the community, and they are involved in terrorism and all that. And that perception is informed by the fact that if you look at the Boko Haram, most of them are teenagers. If you look at ISIS, they recruit people of about 26 years old. The Jama'a Islamia members are young, and mostly young male, right? Almost half of 1.4 billion people living in fragile and conflict-affected states are under the age of 20. Al-Shabaab means young people. So it's some of these ideologies that have made a lot of people then come to think that the perpetrators of violent extremism are actually young people, because all of these violent extremist groups are made of young people. And so in understanding the drivers of violent extremism, and I know violent extremism is a terminology that has contested definitions across the different demographics. A lot of people have different understanding of what violent extremism is. And in this case, I'd like for us to define violent extremism as the belief and action of persons who either use or support the use of violence to progress social, economic, or political objectives. That will be our definition for violent extremism as we continue with this webinar. And I repeat, the belief and actions of persons who either use or support the use of violence to progress social, economic, and political objectives. And so, what are some of the drivers of violent extremism? Yeah. The lack of social economic opportunities is one of them. Because when people cannot sustain themselves, then they tend to end up doing a lot of illegal ways of accumulating, say, wealth, or just how to sustain themselves financially. Marginalization and discrimination. When people are not heard, their grievances are not considered by either our governments, our local administrations, then people tend to revolt, and some of it then turns violent. Poor governance, that's an issue we can talk about till the cows come back in Africa. Most of us struggle a lot with poor governance, violation of human rights, and the rule of law. Prolonged and unresolved conflicts. I know as an African, that is one thing that we keep saying. There are conflicts every day. Conflicts are endemic. People are not addressing all this conflict as they're supposed to. We have other conflicts emanating from a continuing conflict. Then we're just lost in the midst of all this that is happening. Radicalizations in prisons. It's so sad that nowadays prisons are basically for young people. You go to the prisons and they're full of young people. And so now, were prisons made for young people? And if you're going to put all these people in prisons, then what are we talking about? The fruition of Africa, the development of Africa, when its youngest population is in prison, and what can we also do to make sure that that is used to our advantage? So I would like to split it into two factors. One, the push factor. The push factor in this sense are the structural conditions that then push a lot of people to violent extremism. Some of these push factors involve one, economic exclusion and unlimited opportunities for upward mobility. The governments are not providing an environment where once you're done with your studies, then it's easily you're easier to get employment opportunities, and go and exercise your skills. Unemployment is one issue that we continue to face as Africans, and it's so bad that we're even frustrated on how then to just continue with the whole uh, process of engaging with our um, specific jurisdictions. Political exclusion, are our votes actually counting to the people that we want to elect? Or, I mean, we've had cases of election rigging, and all these things have made a lot of young people apathetic to elections, and people do not necessarily vote expecting that the people who they voted for are going to win because, I mean, of election rigging, which most of us have experience in. Rejection of the growing diversity in society. And this is one of those things. As an African culture, we have our culture that is so embedded in us that it's not easily accepted when you're bringing other views, As a young person, you should listen to what your elders say and not say much. They have the final solution. But now times have changed and we have different experiences. Technology is, every day we have something new, and we're also just kind of trying to cope up with everything that is happening. And we lack that intergenerational cohesion when it comes to decision making and implementation, when it comes to addressing all these issues. And so then, how again do we start formulating a framework that will make sure that both sides are considered when it comes to engaging? Human rights violations. I mean, we can talk all day about just how, we don't have access to clean water, to healthcare, or it's so expensive to access some of these services. Healthcare has been a big issue when it comes to, accessibility of the most common of drugs. A lot of people are dying of malaria. We don't have good preventative measures. Most of our government have been focusing mostly on curative than preventive measures when it comes to healthcare treatment. And some of these basic human rights are not accessible as we would want to have them. Poor governance is one of the major structural conditions that we continue to face as African young people and just Africans in general. The balkanization of violence. Violence has become, we've made it seem like it's a day-to-day thing. It's an African thing to be violent. So we are ending up having a lot of young people thinking that violence is the only solution, while it's not. Yeah. And so, just looking at now at the second factor, the pull factor, which is mostly the individual incentives that then make people join extremist groups, violent extremist groups. Self-realization. As young people, we are finding ourselves, we want to know what our purpose is. And so most of the time, if we are not, if we do not have a good background of what has been happening in our society, then it's easier for us to inherit what is already going on in society, which is not necessarily a good thing. But in that phase of self-realization, we crave for purpose and legitimacy. And so most of the time we end up joining extremist groups because then it sort of helps us understand who we are, but is it the right way of doing it? The other pull factor, which is an individual inception, is feeling or need to protect people against grievances and victimization. As Africans, we are communal, so you feel like for you to be able to protect your family, you have to be violent and attack the people who are necessarily just opposing the opinions that you already have. And some of these things then end up just turning violent, and it's not good for our communities. Conspiracy theories and distortion of and misuse of beliefs, You've grown up knowing that or seeing domestic violence at home, and so you end up thinking that it is okay for a man to hit a woman because you grew up seeing your dad hit your mom, or sometimes you see your mom hitting your dad, and the cycle continues. Political ideologies and what some ethnic and cultural differences and leadership, social networks that we identify with can also make us individually um, contribute to violent extremism. Heroism, just wanting to feel like, and everybody praising you for standing up for your community or your family. And so you want that heroic act to be seen, but is that the proper way of going about it? And some do it for economic gains. Hey, let's face it, some of these people are paid really well to bomb themselves. The belief that once you know, die for your community, then you're heroic, and your family will never suffer because then the family will be paid off because you have done this really heroic thing. And so some individuals are pushed to that because of, let's face it, poverty will make you do everything to see your family prosper. So a lot of people have ended up um, joining all this violent extremist group to make sure that they are financially capable and they're sustaining their families the way they would want to. And so, just looking at both the push and the pull factor, we should also note that there is a substantial overlap between what can be considered a push and a pull, and the attempts to separate the two can be an exercise that is futile, because push and pull factors often minimize the importance of group dynamics. Because you will agree with me, when it comes to understanding resilience and group dynamics, some of these people and some of the push and pull and pull factors can then help groups then just kind of help other people form all those ideologies that then lead them to seeking violent extremism. And so um, we need to understand resilience. And resilience in terms of, one, we work to identify preventive factors of the basic causes of why individuals and why all these structural conditions then force people, and in this case, the perception that young people are then lured to join violent extremist groups. And so, we can work in preventive factors that enable groups and individuals to resist violent messages, narratives, and recruitment. And how can we start doing this? One, by having someone who genuinely cares about you. We are living in a society that is changing rapidly every day. And so it's very easy for us to feel isolated and nobody calls to even check on you and to just know, the basic things. Have you eaten? Have you done what you're supposed to do? And so just having somebody who can genuinely check up on you and know what you have been up to can also help prevent individuals from joining some of these extremist groups. The other thing is exposure to different ideas and opinions. It's funny how we live in a multicultural society as Africans. Every country has at least 40 ethnic groups. However, we end up not engaging them and just listening to other opinions and other ideas. And so we end up thinking that our ideas are the best. And so whoever comes with a counter idea or a counter opinion then becomes a threat. While sometimes they're just advised by their exposure and level of understanding of their own culture. So then we are able to better identify persons who look um, um, we're able to identify some of these people who lack some of these basic preventive measures. Like when you see somebody who does not have somebody who cares for them, so they don't end up sharing. Then you start noticing that they become very receptive to some of the basic things, like just having a discussion, and they're feeling like they're being attacked, or they are easily to join some of these violent extremist groups, because then they have that brotherhood of people who can then listen and care for them. Then the other thing is we can also be able to identify programs and activities that might strengthen the prevalence of these protective measures. Just understanding the basic of just feeling needed, feeling loved, and feeling like you are part of a community of people that cares. So while in understanding group dynamics, violent extremism is often a group related phenomenon, because I know sometimes just working in, say, Mombasa, I remember a young person telling me that most of the young people are recruited by their friends who joined, say, Al-Shabaab before them. And so with time, they start, their life starts changing, and eventually they lure these other people to joining Al-Shabaab. And so slowly by slowly, you start realizing that the recruitment happens when your friend, whose life has now changed, calls you in. And because you're looking for that brotherhood, you're looking for that person who actually cares about you, you're looking for your own identity and to feel like you're contributing to a bigger cause in the world, then it's easier for you to be lured into joining violent extremism. UNDP, the United Nations Development Programs, found out that majority of surveyed members of violent extremist groups in Africa were introduced to the groups by a friend. So this is a proven concept that a lot of young people who end up joining these extremist groups are actually recruited by their friends. And so just looking at the push and pull factors and seeing how we can then bring all this group dynamism into the whole picture. And so in summary, the drivers of violent extremism are: one, grievances, which is a push factor, and individual incentives. You wanting to feel part of a whole, your purpose. Then the absence of resilience and protective measures that we've already spoken about, plus socialization and recruitment, then ends up leading to radicalization and violent extremism. So, Sharon says, watching you from office with my colleagues, keep up the good. Oh, thank you, Sharon. I will try and answer some of your questions as they come. Thank you so much for those who are joining us. We are talking about youth peace and security in Africa, and just looking at what lures young people to joining these violent extremist groups. And we've already spoken about the push and pull factors, the push factors being the structural conditions, poor governance, the pull factors being individual incentives that make individuals want to join this extremist groups. And thank you as we continue in this series. So what are some of the mechanisms to preventive violent extremism? One, we should make it harder for terrorists to recruit online and offline, and also in prisons, because now they're recruiting in prisons. And I know in Kenya they're also recruiting in schools. We have a lot of people joining all these militia groups from schools. They're targeting universities. So we need to be very vigilant, because no one is immune in this case. Everyone needs to be very vigilant of their friends and the people around them, because it's very easy to be lured into such things, especially if you're just kind of trying to find yourself. Then we also need to shape the norms against violence. Violence is not our second name as Africans, and so we need to start talking ill against violence. Violence is not the answer to anything. We can solve our issues amicably. So we also need to focus mostly on preventive, because I know there's the countering violent extremism, and a lot of us think of countering violent extremism in a military sense, where you're looking at policemen who are coming to attack people, or the extrajudicial killings that are happening in our societies, which also just kind of hinder us from even accessing um, all these administrative parts, the police stations, when we hear of a friend who is um, lured to joining some of these groups, or somebody who has, say, guns in their house, and we are not so sure what they're using those guns to do. Um, so just looking at the social fabric, and just being vigilant of where we are. The other thing is increasing resilience to violent extremism. You know, we need to talk ill against violence in whatever form, be it domestic violence, be it terrorism. I know today, this week rather, in Kenya, we have been having a lot of security alerts from the American embassy, just telling the citizens to be vigilant of attacks. And you see some of these things already then continue to sometimes even cause fear, because then you won't go to your normal chill out spots because you are afraid somebody is going to attack anytime. We also need our governments to address all these structural conditions that drive violent extremism, you know, the push factors that we spoke about. And so counteract the benefits of using terrorism tactics, you know, the fame, the money, and the sympathy. Can we then bring our social fabric where we are genuinely hanging out and just making sure that our friends are taken care of? We really listen to some of the grievances that they share, you know, and taking it into consideration that it's not their fault. Sometimes it's just how things are. And but as friends, we are there for them. We listen to them, and not just being there to judge and offer quick solutions that are sometimes not even helpful to um, to them. And so, while addressing this in 2015, we had a historic resolution, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250, that was passed unanimously by the Security Council, that typically addresses youth, peace, and security issues. And the UN Security Council Resolution 250 is pegged on 5 pillars. One, participation. So the resolution calls on member states to allow young people to participate in decision making, inclusive, representative of at all levels. You know, when it comes to the grassroots level, the national level, when it comes to just making sure that young people are represented in all sorts of government bodies, the ministries. Do we have the participation of young people? The second one is protection. So the resolution calls on member states to protect civilians from all forms of sexual and gender-based violence, and respect human rights of individuals. The third one is preventive. So preventive, this is, the member states are supposed to facilitate an enabling environment where young people are recognized and provided for support to implement violation, to implement violent preventative activities and support social cohesion. The fourth one is on partnership. On partnership, the member states are encouraged to increase political, financial, technical, and logical support that takes account of the need and participation of young people, because we know most of the time, actually last week I was in a forum where one of the members said that 97% of youth organizations are voluntary based. And so if you have 97% of youth organizations, and this is in the entire world, not having a funding to support their work, then how are we expecting them to be in good terms with all these other bodies that are, they are heavily funded? I mean, heavily funded. And so we also need to make sure that young people activities are funded to make sure that it's inclusive and their voices are being heard. The last one is in disintegration and disengagement and reintegration. You know, a lot of young people are caught up in the whole disarmament. Fine, we have some young people owing ammunitions, but when they decide to put down the guns, the police are waiting for them. And so we do not have mechanism that protect these people when they decide to come back to the community. When it comes to to integration, how acceptable are our communities when they know Christine was caught and I was in prison and now I have been released? How acceptable are the communities to see me? Or they'll still consider me as one, the violent lady who was caught by the police and now is back to our community to continue stealing or doing all those sorts of violence that I was involved in before. And so all these issues needs to be taken into account. And so the UN Resolution Council, the UN Resolution 2250, then addresses these things. And as young people, for the first time, we have a resolution that speaks for us, and it literally has one of the asks is that the UN Secretary General should do a progress study to make sure that young people's involvement in peace building are considered and are taken into account, not necessarily just within the UN level, but at the grassroots also, a whole inclusive youth um, movement. So now, thank you so much for those who continue to join this webinar. We are talking about youth peace and security in Africa. And sadly, I only have 1 hour, so we should be ending soon. And I also want you to get some time to ask me some questions as we delve into this. I am happy to answer some of your questions even after this. You can still just continue the discussion. And so now I want to delve into what is our role as young African people. One, we do a lot of work. You know, we do a lot of work in our communities, but that work is not documented. And so it's very easy for people to come and say, in our election, we have a lot of young people who are throwing stones. We have a lot of people who are running into in the streets and causing havoc. But we don't have a lot of other organizations documenting the good work they are doing in the communities, documenting all those community-led involvement, you know. The young people who are just holding music festivals to encourage a culture of peace. Why don't we document all these things and then help to change the conversation on young people being violent and perpetrators of peace? And so let's document all this work to demystify all these stereotypes as for youth being violent, and encourage more nonviolent youth engagement and more youth peace building work. African youth, as African youth, we need to understand that prevention is our primary task. And we need to have more youth-led initiatives that are geared towards preventive and transformative societies. You know, because we are the majority anyway. And if we are the majority, then we need to speak for ourselves. If we don't, that's why it's very easy for government to just bring us policies and they want us to implement while we were not involved in. And so we need to come together and make sure that we prevent all these loopholes that are in our societies that will help us. And sometimes it's as easy as just taking your phone and calling your friend and asking them genuinely how they're doing. You know, most of us are so fixated on sharing posts or memes that are sometimes counterproductive. but we don't take the time to genuinely care for our friends. And that is the minute thing we can all do, just making sure that we know where our friends are at what time, what kind of thoughts are running in their minds. And by changing that mentality of being idle and thinking of violence, then we can slowly start to address all these challenges that we continue to experience in our communities. And thirdly, we need to build an agency of peace leadership. It's something lacking in our continent, and it's mostly needed, especially if we are to effectively participate in decision making. You know, sadly, we have inherited a culture of things not working, a culture of corruption, a culture of um, systems that are just not even trustworthy. But now, how do we address that as a people who are willing to change the social norm? We are tired of all these structural injustices. We are tired of all these femicides. We are tired of all these um, kidnappings. You know, we are tired of poor governance. But then, how do we amicably address all these issues without causing a lot of violence? And you see, sometimes it's as easy as asking for peaceful leadership. Our leaders themselves are fighting. So if we asked them for, a peaceful coexistence, then it's so easy for a trickle down effect and for us to be joined into the decision making. Because what will it help us if we join the decision making table, but the people who are already at the decision making table are fighting? You see, we'll only be causing more problems than solutions. And hey, a friend of mine usually says we are not any special as young people. It's a transitionary phase. We are here today, and tomorrow we will be the 60-year-olds, we'll be the 70-year-olds. What are we doing now that our children's children will look at us tomorrow and not be bitter the way we are bitter in addressing all these issues, be it structural or just individually? Our parents keep saying they failed us. Are our children going to be saying the same thing for us? And so I'm calling upon all of us to use those small things, just checking up on your friends, making sure that the education that we're educating ourselves in is advised by our values as Africans, and not necessarily just looking into, how best can I profit as a person. When we go to these conferences, let's not be conference hoppers, professional conference goers, but you go to these conferences to ask questions, to seek clarification, to seek for answers, to seek for solutions, and just building the continuum to make sure that we are the change we want to see in our continent. And I want to thank all those young people who are working tirelessly, using arts to address peaceful coexistence, using poetry to just say what is happening in the society. Those people who are mobilizing young people and having dialogues in the communities to make sure that people are knowledgeable about what is happening and how to prevent all these things. People who are talking about healthcare systems and how accessible some of these safe spaces are, some of the alternative methods of seeking contraception and all that. These are the things that we need to build on as young people, and especially young people who have been exposed and they have the knowledge and the know-how. We should hold each other accountable and make sure that we leave no one behind. I want to start taking questions because it's now 2:41. Yeah, so let me know what kind of questions you have. And so, yeah, I remember somebody asked me, how can we then come together to make sure that, Agenda 2030 and the African Union Agenda 2063 is collaborative with young people, is when we come together. Because one of the things that I keep hearing from people is young people are not organized, young people do not talk amongst themselves. It's like we're competing amongst each other. We keep doing replicative projects in the community because We probably know a donor, and we are friends with the donor, and so you don't want to compliment your friend's um, project. You want to do your own and then shine. It's not helping us. Let's come together and do work together, partner together as young people, because that's the only way we form um, a strong army, you know, to move together. A shout out to the young people of Southern Sudan who are working tirelessly to make sure that they have policies that are addressing their issues in South Sudan and just being included in the whole peace process that's happening in Sudan. Well done, Sudan, well done. The young people of Cameroon, I know you guys, it's crazy in Cameroon, but I love your resilience. I love your passion for peace and your passion to address all the ill that is happening in Cameroon. I see Sonny Omari just joined. Sonny, keep doing the good work you're doing in Yaoundé, in Bamenda, and keep up the good work. I know we recently just formed the Youth Mediators program in Cameroon, and the young people in Cameroon continue to amaze me. Keep up the good work. The young people of Somalia, I know you guys are working tirelessly. Shout out to you all. The people in Nigeria, Angola, Mali, Burkina Faso, Liberia, Sierra Leone. You guys keep up the good work. People in Botswana, hello Sisame. Keep up doing the good work. We really appreciate you. And we know for us to move together as a continent, we have to work together. You know, it's no longer a Botswanan issue. It's no longer a Sierra Leone issue. It's an African issue, and we need to move together as Africans, as a people who have been oppressed for so long that we're so tired right now, and our time is now. Our time is now, and I call on all of us in our own small individual efforts to make sure that we are the change that we need to see in Africa. And so, recently, 2020 is the African theme is silencing the guns. And shout out to a very able African Union Youth Envoy, Aya Chebi. We thank you for what you're doing for the young people in the continent. We don't thank you enough, but I want to take this opportunity to say that we really thank you for amplifying our voice in the big decision-making platforms with our presidents, and continue the continuum. We are here to support you. And African young people, please, let's support what Aya is doing, because she is now our face. And if we do not support her, then we are doing a disservice to ourselves as African young people. So I call on us, young people of Africa, to support what Aya Chebe is doing in silencing the guns and the many other projects that she is involved in, because it's time for us now to speak as one people, to speak with one voice. I will be taking questions. Do we have any questions? Again, for those who are joining us, my name is Christine Odera, and we are talking about youth peace and security in Africa, and some of the stereotypes that have been addressed, and what we can do, and our role as young people in addressing some of these challenges. Let me know some of the questions that you have, as we have at least 10 more minutes before we end this webinar. Any questions? Again, for those who are joining us, I want to draw your attention to the African Youth Charter. I hope all of you are concerned with what your rights and duties are as an African youth. And again, an African youth is someone between the age of 15 to 35. And so this is technically a Bible. This is what tells us what we need to know as African young people. So please read this, know what you should advocate for, what your rights are. Please, please, please. Any questions? Shiko, thank you for joining in. Thank you all for joining. Sankale, Commissioner, thank you so much for joining. Matilda, good job, Christine. Thank you for joining. Any questions? Do you guys have any questions? I'm waiting for questions. Any questions? No questions. Okay, I'm glad. So to, again, just give us a recap of what we are talking about. The role of young people in addressing um, youth peace and security issues in the continent. And I don't want to go and delve mostly into the policies and whatnot. We all know that some of these policies do not even see the light of day because some of us are just so poor in implementing all these good paperwork that do. But you as a person, you who has people around you, how then can you help your friend, help a friend, help a friend to not join all these violent extremism groups, you know? Terrorism is not the answer. It is not the answer. But these terrors are done by people we know, people who we are afraid to talk to, while we can talk to them and help them just mend our social fabric. You know, we as Africans do not advocate for violent extremism, and it's about time that we start changing our education because really education is the best weapon when it comes to addressing all this violent extremism because one, it starts to open our minds to understanding other people's opinions and ideas from their cultural perception. And so it's okay to have different opinions, you know. It's okay to respect people who have a different belief than you are and amicably come together without necessarily just having violence. I'll bring your attention to the Missing Piece report, which is a report that was produced in 2008 in 2018, sorry, after the UN resolution 2050. And so the missing report says that 1 in 4 young people are affected by violence and armed conflict. You know, and if you're going to silence the guns, then what are we saying? If you're going to silence the guns are not necessarily the physical guns. The guns is the guns of mental health, the guns of feminism that is not progressive in our society, you know. Silencing the guns of climate change. You know, climate change is here and all of us are affected by climate change. Silencing the guns of poverty, which is really rampant in our society. You know, a lot of young women have a big role to play in when it comes to addressing peace and security issues. But a lot of young people, young women in this case, are not included. So we need to also demystify the notion that young women do not have a say in all this. And I want to thank FemWise, which is an African Union women program that helps a lot of women in the continent to then join the discussion on mediation and amplifying a lot of voices of women in peace building and mediation. Evans is asking, how do you ensure that the campaign is felt right at the grassroots level, especially in Kenya? There are many youth who may not be able to get access to such information unless the information is availed to them through the means they understand better. That has been a challenge, Evans, and thank you, because one of the things is some of these policies have really hard jargons to understand unless you are an expert. Then sometimes it's very hard for the local people within the grassroots to understand some of these documents. So what we are trying to do is translate some of these documents into native languages, and maybe we should also provide more talks like this, where we can, just reach out to the people in the grassroots through Erasmus and have these conversations for them to know what is happening globally and how they can also be involved in that. So that is work in progress, but I'm happy to share some information. I will send some links on this webinar to just kind of help us understand. And for those of you who already running youth organization, I'll really be glad to share with you some of these documents and information for you to use when you're doing your day-to-day youth events. Samson is asking, can you provide a link through which we can download the report? I will definitely do that soon as I am done with this. So I have spoken of the missing piece report of 2018. I will share with you. It's a detailed report on what is happening and how young people have been involved, and some of the stereotypes that exist that are not working in favor of young people. I shall definitely do that. I will also share the resolution for those who would like to see it. Any more questions? Let me check if there are more questions. So the last bit was, do we need to inform the West of what is happening in Africa? Sadly, or to our advantage, we live in a connected community. We live in a connected world. So nowadays, the globe is such a small place. It's a village, and the conversation now is on global citizenship. So whatever happens in Kenya affects somebody else out there, be it in South Africa, in North Africa, in West Africa, in Central Africa. What happens in Central Africa affects somebody in South Africa. What happens in the US affects somebody in Africa. And you see, in Africa, we rely on foreign exchange through tourism. And so if we don't get a lot of tourists, then we know our economy goes down, because we get a lot of money from all these tourists who come from the West. And so we are directly or indirectly affected if we don't share communication around. Right now, we know coronavirus on what is happening. We just the other day heard of the outbreak, and somebody in Nigeria having contacted the disease. Luckily, the guy was Italian and not actually African. And so that just tells you how connected we are, and we cannot afford to ignore what is happening around the world. So we need to share information. We need to let other people know, because we need to work together. We need to work together. And I don't want to go into the whole politics of it, but we are better placed. Our history might not serve us right, might hinder us from having all these conversations, but hey, if you're going to have good policies and measures that are going to be effective for us Africans, we also need to make sure that we know how to engage with the West. And so they also need to be involved in all these processes, again, because of how interconnected our world is today. Thank you, Ivana Makula, for joining. How is Uganda? Do we have any questions? Okay, if you don't have any more questions, that was my time. And I hope we shall continue this conversation even after this. Yeah, send me messages. You can DM me other questions that you might have. and I'm happy to share with you. Again, thank you so much for your kind attention. I appreciate you all for joining in, and I look forward to engaging more in the near future. I thank you, I thank you, I thank you. Asante sana, merci, obrigado. Bye for now.